In the history of World War II, few cities carry as much symbolic weight as Nuremberg, Germany. Once a prominent medieval center of the Holy Roman Empire, Nuremberg was transformed by Hitler into the ideological and ceremonial heart of the Nazi regime.
Nazi ideology viewed the world as divided into races, with superior and inferior races.
From the infamous mass rallies to the codification of racial hatred in the Nuremberg laws, and finally to the trials that held the regime's top criminals accountable, Nuremberg's name is now inextricably tied to the rise and fall of the Third Reich. To understand why Hitler and the Nazi leadership chose this city, one must examine its deep historical roots, its cultural significance, and how it became the stage for both propaganda and justice. Although anti-Semitism was not unique to Germany, it had long been present in Nuremberg. In the late Middle Ages, the Jewish community in Nuremberg faced frequent persecution. In 1298, a wave of violence swept through the region, and Jews were accused of profaning or harming consecrated bread used in Christian communion, leading to massacres. In the 14th century, during the Black Death, Jews were scapegoated and murdered across Europe, including in Nuremberg.
Context of the Black Death, so that sense of plague again and anti-Semitism being kind of interfused.
By 1499, Jews were officially expelled from Nuremberg and other cities and not permitted to return until centuries later. This long-standing exclusion contributed to a cultural environment where anti-Semitic ideas could fester without opposition. Although Jews were gradually allowed to return in the 19th century, many Germans, including those in Nuremberg, viewed them as outsiders. Hitler exploited this undercurrent of prejudice when crafting the Nazi worldview. In his book, Mein Kampf, Hitler portrayed Jews as parasites and a threat to German purity. By the time he rose to power in the early 1930s, anti-Semitism was already embedded in German society, and Nuremberg was fertile ground for advancing his racial ideology. Nuremberg, located in the heart of Bavaria, has a history that predates the Nazi era by centuries. During the Middle Ages, it was one of the most important cities in the Holy Roman Empire. It served as a free imperial city, and from the 15th century onward, it was a hub of commerce, craftsmanship, and cultural expression. More importantly, it was where the Holy Roman emperors held their imperial diets and stored the imperial regalia, the symbols of sovereign power. This legacy made Nuremberg a natural choice for any regime seeking to tie itself to a glorified German past. Hitler was acutely aware of symbolism. He believed that the revival of Germany required not only political change, but also a psychological and spiritual transformation rooted in national pride. By choosing Nuremberg, he sought to align the Nazi movement with the legacy of German imperial greatness, thus inspiring it with historical legitimacy. The city's architecture, medieval charm, and central location made it ideal for mass rallies and ceremonial spectacles designed to awe the German people and reinforce Nazi ideology. Beginning in the 1920s, the Nazi Party held annual rallies in Nuremberg, but it was after Hitler passed the Enabling Act in 1933, giving him dictatorial powers, that these events escalated dramatically. From 1933 to 1938, the city hosted massive Reich Party Day rallies that were part political convention, part propaganda spectacle, and part spiritual ritual. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, was tasked with transforming Nuremberg into a city worthy of the Third Reich.
At its core, the Nazi worldview was racist and biological, to which nearly all positive human development in science, technology, art, architecture, and other fields could be attributed.
He designed vast arenas and monumental structures such as the Zeppelin Field and the Great Road, a vast parade avenue meant for military displays. These grandiose constructions were meant to symbolize the eternal nature of Nazi rule. The rallies themselves were staggering in scale. Up to 700,000 people would descend on the city for days of parades, speeches, military drills, and propaganda films. Hitler used these events to showcase the unity of the German people under his leadership and to introduce new policies. Filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl immortalized the 1934 Nuremberg rally in her film Triumph of the Will, a visually groundbreaking yet chilling work of propaganda that glorified Hitler and embodied the core ideals of Nazi ideology. Nuremberg became the stage for Hitler's cult of personality and the theater of totalitarian power. Here, Hitler stood as the messianic figure guiding Germany to its rebirth. In 1935, during the height of the Nazi rallies, Hitler introduced a set of laws that would become a turning point in the regime's systematic persecution of Jews. Announced during the rally in Nuremberg and subsequently named after the city, the Nuremberg Laws codified Nazi racial ideology into law. There were two primary laws. One, the law for the protection of German blood and German honor, which prohibited marriages and sexual relations between Jews and Aryans. Two, the Reich Citizenship Law, which stripped Jews of German citizenship and reduced them to the status of subjects. The Nuremberg Laws did more than socially exclude Jews. They were intended to erase them entirely from the political and legal fabric of the German nation. These laws also laid the groundwork for further persecution. Over the next few years, Jews were expelled from civil service, universities, and professions. Jewish-owned businesses were boycotted or confiscated. Jewish children were segregated in schools, then gradually excluded altogether. These racial policies also targeted Roma people, black Germans, and others deemed racially impure by the Nazi regime. The city of Nuremberg, once a symbol of German culture, now became the place where legal anti-Semitism was formalized. This was not a coincidence. Hitler deliberately chose Nuremberg to lend legitimacy to these decrees. By proclaiming them in the heart of his ideological capital, he ensured that they would be etched into the national psyche. Following Hitler's Nuremberg Laws, anti-Semitic policy became more radical and violent. In 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, marked a nationwide pogrom against Jews. Synagogues were burned, businesses destroyed, and thousands of Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. During World War II, this persecution escalated into genocide. Hitler and the Nazi leadership implemented the final solution: the systematic extermination of Europe's Jewish population. Over 6 million Jews were murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, gas vans, and extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka. Although the Nuremberg rallies ceased after 1938 due to the war, the city's symbolic connection to Nazi ideology remained intact. It had been the city where Jews were first cast out of the national community by law, and by extension, where the Holocaust had taken one of its most significant steps toward realization. After Hitler's suicide in April 1945 and the subsequent surrender of Germany, the Allied powers faced a monumental decision: how to prosecute the architects of the Third Reich. They chose Nuremberg as the site for the International Military Tribunal, not only for its symbolic weight, but also for practical reasons. The Palace of Justice had survived the war relatively intact and had an adjacent prison to house the accused. The Nuremberg trials, which began in November 1945, were historic. For the first time in history, world leaders were tried for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. 24 high-ranking Nazi officials were indicted, including Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess. The charges outlined in the tribunal revealed the extent of Nazi crimes, including the Holocaust, aggressive warfare, and the enslavement of millions. The trials marked a turning point in international law. They established the principle that individuals, even heads of state, could be held accountable for atrocities. The legal concept of genocide was introduced into the global vocabulary during the Nuremberg trials, marking the first time it was used in an international legal context. The trials served as a blueprint for future courts, such as those addressing atrocities in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. The choice of Nuremberg was deliberate and symbolic. The city that had once celebrated Hitler as a messiah and witnessed the birth of legalized racism now stood as a courtroom for justice. It was poetic justice that the same location where Nazi ideology had reached its apex was now being used to dismantle it and hold its creators accountable. Today, Nuremberg stands as a city of contrasts and historical reckoning. It has preserved parts of the Nazi rally grounds as educational sites, turning instruments of propaganda into tools for remembrance. The Documentation Center at the Nazi Party rally grounds provides visitors with an in-depth look at the causes and consequences of the Nazi regime. The city has also embraced its role in the promotion of human rights. Nuremberg now hosts international human rights conferences and awards, trying to redefine its legacy not as a symbol of tyranny, but of accountability and renewal. Schools, museums, and public memorials throughout the city keep the memory of the Holocaust and Nazi crimes alive, ensuring that the world does not forget. In this dual legacy of darkness and redemption, Nuremberg remains a city that teaches us the consequences of unchecked hatred, the power of propaganda, and the importance of justice. It stands as both a warning and a hope, a place where the worst of humanity was revealed and where the world first tried to say, "Never again."